Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight, we'll be concluding our journey on the art of war. We'll be going through chapter 13. We'll have two readings, and then we'll go through Jason's translation and open it up for comments. So with that, James, would you be so gracious to go ahead and read part one?
Okay. Use of Spies. Sun Tzu said, raising a host of 100,000 men and marching them great distances entails heavy loss on the people and a drain on the resources of the state. The daily expenditure will amount to 1,000 ounces of silver. There will be commotion at home and abroad, and men will drop down exhausted on the highways. As many as 700,000 families will be impeded in their labor. Hostile armies may face each other for years, striving for the victory which is decided in a single day. This being so, to remain in ignorance of the enemy's conditions simply because one grudges the outlay of 100 ounces of silver in honors and emoluments is the height of inhumanity. One who acts thus is no leader of men, no present help to his sovereign, no master of victory. Thus, what enables the wise sovereign and the good general to strike and conquer and achieve things beyond the reach of ordinary men is foreknowledge. Now, this foreknowledge cannot be elicited from spirits. It cannot be obtained inductively from experience, nor by any deductive calculation. Knowledge of the enemy's dispositions can only be obtained from other men. Hence,
Thank you,
I'm sorry, I'm there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, James. So would anybody else like to read their version of the Art of War? If not, we can go right to Jason's translation. Okay.
I have
You have it?
translation. I don't know if people want to hear it. I'd be happy to read it.
By all means. Thank you, Mark.
Master Sun said, in general, the cost to the people and to the public coffers to mobilize an army of 100,000 and dispatch it on a punitory expedition of 1,000 li is 1,000 pieces of gold per day. There will be upheaval at home and abroad, with people trekking exhausted on the roadways and some 700,000 households kept from their work in the fields. The two sides will quarrel with each other for several years in order to fight a decisive battle on a single day. If, begrudging the outlay of ranks, emoluments, and 100 pieces of gold, a commander does not know the enemy's situation, his is the height of inhumanity. Such a person is no man's commander, no ruler's counselor, and no master of victory. Thus, the reason, yeah, I think
it does. I thought you stopped. My apologies.
Thus, the reason the far-sighted ruler and his superior commander conquer the enemy at every move and achieve successes far beyond the reach of the common crowd is foreknowledge. Such foreknowledge cannot be had from ghosts and spirits, educed by comparison with past events, or verified by astrological calculations. It must come from people who know the enemy's situation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. So Jason, would you like to go ahead and share?
Okay, chapter 13, the beginning. Okay, I think that this, to me, this paragraph is the most important paragraph in the chapter 13. So basically, at least three, I will say three phrases, and then I think the first one is talking about basically repeat what chapter 2 talking about, how much you have to spend, what's the cost of during this war, any war, how much it costs. Second paragraph try to tell you what's the moral. Is that moral? It is moral to use spy, or if you don't use spy, that's most immoral. Okay. Number 3 is tell you how to get the information, because during the war, how the determined factor of winning is the foreknowledge, but how to do it. I think that's very important in Sun Tzu's teaching. So let me go through this one. Typically, one raises hundreds of thousands of troops who will march thousands of miles to the battlefield, raising the expenditure from the people for the salary for the officers and spending thousands of golds daily, facing disturbance within and without, having people exhausted on the roadside, and as many as 700,000 families without the labor production. Okay, so again, Sun Tzu is very precise, not precise, very like to use all the numbers, specific number to show the severe of the cost. Okay, number 2. This situation will persist for years for the purpose to win in a single day. It is extremely immoral, okay, if one still cherishes the honor of nobility and hundreds of golds and hesitate to reward the people, reward the spies, and doesn't have the information from the enemy. In this case, he cannot be the general of the people. He cannot be the assistant to the ruler. He cannot be the ruler of victory, or you want to call he can own no victory. So this one I need a little bit explanation. I think most of the translation will translate it's very inhumane. Okay, if you cherish your money. Okay, so Chinese word here, they use 不仁, that means not ren. Okay, so since in general Chinese teaching, ren, humanity, is the most important moral, okay, most important virtue to a person. So when you use negative term, not ren, okay, I don't think translate as inhuman, that makes sense. I think it should translate as immoral. So ren, since ren is the most important moral sense, so if you are not ren, that means you are immoral. So here is telling you, you spend so much money, cost so much, try to defeat your enemy in one battle, and you still care about the money to reward the spy. If you do this, that's very immoral. That means your previous cost totally waste. Okay, so I think that's Sun Tzu want to tell you. You using spy in a way, it's the moral way. Okay, not using spy is immoral. Number 3. Therefore, the reason why an enlightened ruler or a good general can act to defeat others and achieve the goal beyond regular people is due to his foreknowledge. So here talking about the importance of foreknowledge and how do we get the foreknowledge? This foreknowledge is not gained from ghost or spirit, nor a copy of past occurrences, nor a verified result from measuring the sky. It comes necessarily from the people who knows the enemy's information. Here's some, I think there's a lot of translation called, is not from calculation. I think the Chinese word use do, okay? So that's why do, okay? So it means measurement. So a lot of translation will call, including Leggett's translation, will call it calculation. But I think that's wrong. The reason is, if you remember at the beginning, at the chapter 1, Sun Tzu said, you need to calculate. You need to calculate, predict, measure, and calculate, right? And then they were contrast. I think here, do means measure, and then he's talking about astrology. You look at astrology and you measure the angle, something like this, you know, kind of superstitious. So he said the foreknowledge is not getting from ghost or spirit, not from past experience, also not from astrology. It should come from the enemy side. So how do you get the enemy? Enemy's information. It must be. I think that's what he tried to do too. Yeah, I'll stop here and thank you. And Amang, if I believe you have something to say.
Thank you. And I appreciate you again retaining a suggestion from me. I agree with what you were saying here. I want to zero in though briefly on this passage that talks about oh, sorry, I lost it there.
You want to see the screen?
No, I've got it here. That it's not ren if one still cherishes the honors of nobility and hundreds of gold, and that is cause to give someone hesitation to enrich a scoundrel, a terrible person, a turncoat, a Benedict Arnold. You can almost see what the hesitation would be from any general, any emperor, any princeling to, why would I give this money to somebody who is turning on their own people? This is an immoral, indecent, they may be invaluable to us on the battlefield, but as a human being, they are despicable. That's his estimation. And what Sun Tzu's making the argument here is, look at what you're spending otherwise. Just on a lark, I looked it up. The cost of the FA-18 fighter jet, if anyone has watched the new Maverick, those things run about 65 million a pop, each jet. And we don't hesitate in the spending of that much money on a single piece of equipment. The equivalency in Sun Tzu's time would be saying, you'll spend thousands of gold on war chariots, but you won't spend that same amount on a person, or half of that amount even, on a single person, because you judge their moral character. And his argument is, this is a time to suspend that judgment, because what needs to be done is to gain that single day's victory, as opposed to protracting a conflict for years and years. Because when rubber meets the road, when everything's said and done, what Sun Tzu's overarching argument is about the cost-benefit analysis and minimizing your cost and maximizing your benefit. And if you're already in for the cost this much, well, half of a jet fighter is worth the cost of a year's less war, because otherwise you'll spend that much again over and you'll benefit no one in the process.
Thank you, Aman. So folks, go ahead and type an exclamation point in Zoom or raise your hand and text exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. So first up, we have David.
I hear the thunder going through. So, yeah, when I was first reading this, I was thinking, what would be the resistance? That's interesting. I like what Amon described, because here's someone in more modern terms. I don't know if this would really apply 400 BC, but if someone is turning to your side, defecting from Russia, saying, I disavow the norms of that community, they're joining you in a sort of heroic way. They're giving up a lot. They're giving up where they came from, what their culture, did offer them, and they're displaced, and they're perceiving your society's values, and they're making a stake in that. So at first, this was sort of mysterious to me, but I like the way Amon explained the suspicion that could be there. I mean, maybe this thinking doesn't apply. Maybe spies in these days at that point weren't converted from a sort of a commitment to a morality of your community. Maybe they were just bought in. Maybe it's not the same kind of thing as saying, we're not really a democracy here in Moscow. That's why I'm ready to betray the fight that is going on, and I'm coming to you and giving you intel. But a little of that is dispelled as we find out kind of the creepy things they're really asked to do as spies, and some of that. So I think it plays out later that they're asked to do some very difficult things, at least in modern terms, in terms of betrayal and destroying somewhat innocent, bumbling, whoever's lying around, they're going to be in trouble. Yeah, they're really going to be asked to do some very difficult things. And that's going to be hard for them. So I guess putting it in terms of, well, your cost of war is 1,000 a day, and we're asking you to put up maybe a tenth of that, or something on an order of magnitude less in order to support the spying. And it's so significant that take that into account. But the human stress and struggle of it is an interesting question. Let's see if that comes up. You don't seem to talk about the emotionality of that. Okay.
Thank you, David. So in order to make sure we keep them on here for the whole chapter, we're going to keep comments to 2 to 3 minutes, and in order to make sure we get through the entire chapter 13. So go ahead, Juan.
Okay, so maybe it's because at the end we noticed that in chapter 12 and 13, the fundamental principles of humanity and wisdom is mentioned very often, contrary to the others chapters between 3 and 13.
Juan, there's a lot of interference on your microphone.
Oh,
Yeah,
I know why.
do you have a fan?
Yeah, I know why. Okay, and the other thing that I want to mention too is that the last 6 characters of the paragraph is the chuti, chuqing, juoye. Okay, so I want to talk about the 4th character, qing. Here it's interesting because sometimes a Chinese character has many layers of meaning, and that qing means at the same time situation and feelings or emotions. And it's interesting because that qing refer to the practical physical situation of the enemy, but also to his emotional state, which is also useful when studying the enemy. And I stop here.
Thank you, Juan. Next up, we have James.
Okay, I'm just going to save some of my power for later. I sort of like disagree on the nature of spies themselves. From what I've learned, and in fact, the amount of money that is involved in spying in modern times, and the CIA and all the organizations that are sort of like small CIAs, like the Ford Foundation, that have done that. I think there's this. We can't forget that these, and he talks about that later. He says that the spies are actually have to always be handled very subtly, not because they're stupid, but because really they're smart. And nowadays the spies are, you know, he says the spies have to be intelligent. So the intelligent are the intelligent people, and so they do a very difficult job, and you know, and there's the and then and that's actually 5 kinds of them, right? They're even officials. They're even the enemy's officials, and so you know, they have to be paid a lot, and that's what he's talking about here. But they're also they're nowadays in modern times, they're the college guys and gals, the college guys and gals, the Mata Hari of the First World War that was capable of seducing, you know, any general or officer or diplomat that she needed to, and knew how to use knew the techniques of using poison and so forth. So this is not, it's okay to impugn their morality, but it doesn't really describe the real actuality. The actuality, these are the most highly intelligent, most highly trained among us. And there's ways, I'll talk about this later since we're limited for time, but there are ways in which the whole society is corrupted, not just the elite.
Be interested to hear more about that later. John.
Yeah, look, just in my translation, which is Ralph Sawyer's, the second part of the second passage says, it talked about the trade-offs between spies and expenditure on the war, and then went on to say this is the ultimate inhumanity. Such a person is not a general for the people, an assistant for a ruler, or the arbiter of victory. And I'm all for an expansive and synthesized reading of any text where you can take it forward or further, but I'm uncertain. Perhaps I'll say it the other way. If the expansive reading is to include morality, then I think that would have its own merits and argument. And to talk about the morality of spying, I could see the attractiveness of that because it is otherwise immoral. And I think Amon made a very good point about that. So, obviously Jason's reading into the translation as well. But I wondered whether the term inhumanity in the translation I read refers more to the inhumanity on one's own side if a general doesn't spend the money, but in fact jeopardizes his society and his own army to a war where he doesn't have the full information. And the reason I say that is because when you come to the definition of inhumanity in the English, that means extremely cruel and brutal behavior, whereas immoral is more not conforming to accepted standards of morality. And as I said, if you're going to take the not conforming to accepted standards of morality argument in this space, I think that's an expansive reading of it, and it has its own virtues. And I think I can't really comment on that because that's not the place I came to it from. But in terms of and I think on face value, it has merit. In terms of inhumanity, though, if you read it that way, then it's a commentary on the general's inability to have all the information, therefore not being the final arbiter of victory, and really just putting at jeopardy not only all the opportunity costs they're otherwise spending on the war, but actually endangering the mission itself. You're far less likely to win if you don't know, well, you're only half as like you're at 50% know yourself, know your opponent. So knowing your opponent is very important. And I'll perhaps say that deception's talked about in the rest of the book in a variety of passages. So I'm not sure you need to make an argument for morality in this area, simply because it's implicit in the rest of the book that war in itself, in and of itself, is an act of deception, has acts of deception within it. So I think the reading of it being inhumanity puts the onus back on the general to have all the information. It's not just the trade-offs of the opportunity cost, but rather the jeopardy it puts his society and army at in just simply not having that information. So,
thank you for that, John. Very much appreciate the distinguishing between the morality of spying and humanity. So next up we have Mark.
Okay, I think Paul may have raised his hand, and I'm definitely willing to wait.
No, go ahead, Mark.
Oh,
You're next.
Sorry. In relation to what John was just saying and others about, and I remember, Jason, how you said that you thought the translation immoral was better than inhuman, which is in the Ames, I think it is. I'm just wondering whether what we're seeing is that within this culture, and maybe within even the Confucianist worldview, that being human and being moral overlap, or they coincide. And so to artificially try to distinguish between them may be not as good as it could be. That wasn't what my question was about, though. It was more the third in the I think it's the third paragraph, where he says it's not to be found, but the foreknowledge is not to be found by ghosts or spirits, or through some sort of deduction from past events, or verified by astronomical calculations. And I think, Jason, you may have had a slightly different translation of that. You thought that something else was better than calculations. But my question is really, does this mean that there is never a time for astronomical calculations? Because I remember from the beginning of chapter 11, he said that during these certain times when the moon is in various constellations, it's either favorable or unfavorable to the fire. So I wonder, is there a distinction between what was going on there with calculations in astronomy versus what is implied here?
Yeah,
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. I think that's two great questions, right? First, about moral and immoral or inhumanity, okay, or inhuman. Since the ren, okay, which we generally translate as benevolence, or translate to humanity, whatever you want to translate, okay, there's no equal English word to match the word ren, okay. But one thing we can sure is ren, this guy, this thing has been viewed as general moral behavior. So reject this means immoral. So that's my point. So I will say, in this word, Sun Tzu used 不仁, which means not ren, or not human, or not benevolence. It means not moral. Okay. Later time, after mentions will focus on yi, which sometimes translated as duty, sometimes translated as righteousness. So after that, people will say not ren, not yi means immoral. So I think that's the reason I will translate as immoral. Second thing, let me show the text here about the measurement. Okay, so anything I translate based on the Chinese word. You probably can see if you don't read it, but you can see the first few words are all book, right? Book. That means you cannot depend on ghost and the spirit. Cannot. 相 means image. Okay, you could say metaphor or analog from 事 behavior or affair. So I will assume you don't use past or foreign affair as reference. Is not 验于度. That's very difficult. Okay, 度 means measurement. So you cannot verify by measurement, which is anti-scientific method, because you measure, verify. That's perfect scientific. But I think here, do in that time, a lot of time means measure the sky, look at the astrology. Okay, so that's one way. And then 必取于人. So basically, you see the word he used, 孙子 used, is not the ghost, not the experience, not by measurement, but by people. Okay, so knowing 敌之情, okay, like Kwang mentioned, 情 means information, but also it means emotion. So what's going on over there? You have to depend on people. Okay, so in this way, so you want to know people's situation, you should base on people, not based on ghost, not based on the experience, not based on the measurement. So I think that's the point here. And then you may disagree, in today's point of view, you measure the sky just like in chapter 11. You see the moon in somewhere, that means they have the windy tomorrow. It's ridiculous. But during that time, they may consider as a science, okay? So that's a science, their science, even you disagree. So I think that's Sun Tzu try to make here. Yeah.
Okay, so
If I could hop in just for one quick second, I wanted to point out, yes, what Jason was saying about the ren and buren, it's very hard to translate that into English terms. In Chinese, it would immediately be understood. But the character for ren, the first one that he's talking about, is simply that same figure as ren that he showed you at the end, but with the number 2 by it. And so it's a person oriented towards another. You can think of that as a moral or social commentary or any number of levels, but the concept contains itself in the Chinese thought, and to not be in accord with that means to be outside of morality and social decorum and social expectation. And as far as the arguing from measurement or from calculation, I think the key difference is very obvious. You can measure natural events that occur in a predictable way. Here you are talking about knowing the inside mind of your enemy. And that is not an empirical thing. That is something that is subject to whim, and therefore you can only know it through the reporting of other people.
thanks, Aman. So we have Paul, Kwan, Sarah, Peter, and James, and Laura actually as well. So
yeah, thanks. And thank you, by the way, Mark, for your charitable offer to yield the floor to me earlier, just to acknowledgement of that. But all good. I didn't know. So all very good. And the conversation is important because of this morality thing that is, I find so interesting that here we are in the context of spies, we're talking about morality, and we're not artificially injecting that. Aman and Jason are telling us it is there in the text. And yet, throughout this text, there's an implicit theme. First of all, as I understand from you guys, these were not ideological wars between communists and capitalists or something in the past, but one could crudely say everybody was trying to get more stuff for themselves. And it was perfectly acceptable to find the best, cheapest, and most honorable way to get the most stuff for yourself. I could tell me if I'm not stating that right. It's a bit crude, but here suddenly, and Aman, I like what Aman said because it mentions those who cherish the honors of nobility. It seems to imply, indeed, that somebody might say, we can't pay spies because they're despicable, immoral creatures, as Aman said. But the only way I can reconcile that to all the other methods of thinking about life, which is we just get more stuff by any ways we can, is that loyalty is a very high virtue in that culture. And so the author has to fight that by showing that there's another higher virtue. So that's a thought and a question. Thanks.
Let me quickly respond to what Paul talked about. I think that's a very interesting thing to think
Yeah.
about this way, right? So in the, let's say, ideal communist, you would say you guys, the capitalists, is totally immoral because making money, compete for money, that's a totally immoral thing. But within this our world, our capitalist society, we have our own moral sense, right? We make more money, but we donate money, we follow the rule. So we are moral. So I think that's the way you already decide to fight the war. You can say fighting the war is immoral, but since you already fighting the war, you do the best.
I think you muted there from the.
Yeah, I'm done. Yeah.
Okay. So next up we have Quan, Sarah, Peter, and then Laura after that.
Okay. I would like to say, and I won't be short, a run here, I think, has to be taken in a very general sense of the duties of the commander. Okay, let's not forget it's about the art of war, it's the art of the ruler. And once again, I would like to repeat that the quality of a commander is wisdom, trustworthiness, humanity, valor, and strictness and discipline. So in this paragraph, it's written in maybe in the 5th line that if a person, a commander, is not capable to use spies to know the dispositions of its enemy, he is no leader of man, no help to his sovereign, and no master of victory. Okay, so run here is to be understood as someone fulfilling his role as perfectly as possible, because when he accepted the role of commander-in-chief, he is bound by duty and by honor to do his best for his country, for his nation, for his sovereign. Okay, so if he's not using at his best in terms of wisdom, in terms of trustworthiness, in terms of humanity, of valor, and of strictness and discipline, he is no leader of man, no help to his sovereign, and no master of victory. In that sense, he's not a run. And I finish here.
Thank you very much for that, Quan. Great insight. Sarah.
Yeah, that was actually, I think what you just said was very, very, very powerful. But I guess my question is really, I kind of forgot it after a few people went, but Jason, if you could just repeat what you were last saying about going directly to the people themselves and not going into the mediator way.
Oh, okay.
And just elaborate on what you kind of found from the writings, or what you perceived from what you read.
Yeah, from the writing, I just go straight from the writing. Okay, in the Chinese text, the text said, not from ghost and the spirit, not from the image of affairs, not from the verification of measurement. It must come from the people, okay, for the information about the enemy. Okay, that's the straight text translation. Okay, so I hope it's clear.
It is. That definitely clarifies exactly what I was. Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
It really depends on how are you going to interpret, right? The image of affairs. How are you going to interpret the verification of measurement? Okay, and how are you going to interpret the meaning of people, right? And I will say people, he means spies. Okay.
Right.
Thanks for the question, Sarah. Peter, then Laura, and then we're going to move on to 2 and 3.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, like, that's well, Jason actually just read that in the right time, because I was going to have him read that as well, you know, if Sarah didn't ask for it. But yeah, I was going to say it's, you know, spies, and I just want to put it into another perspective that I think a lot of people haven't, nobody talked about it yet. So with regards to And once in a while, people will say, like, what about, satellites, right? The ultimate spying thing, military satellites you're seeing from the ultimate bird's eye perspective. And like, is that considered spying? And honestly, I think that's only limited to geographic spying, to be honest. Because, from what Jason just read, that passage, you really can't know the details, the ins and outs of your enemy from a human to human level. Unless you send other humans, right, spies, to actually get person-to-person interaction. And like I said, one of the biggest spy networks in World War II was in Shanghai, one of the untouched, areas of the city that was not bombed by Japan, because it was part, British, American, and French, I think Italian at the same time. So, and that being said, like when you say ren, right, ren, yeah, it is pretty much, the person or humanity. And I was thinking that, this is interesting to think about, because I think spying, when it comes to the human side of things, it's one of those things that will actually truly live throughout times, meaning that there's really nothing else that can truly replace it, right? Like even wiretapping someone's phone, it's still not the same thing, if I'm going to be honest with you. So, and I also just realized that the character Ren is in my profile picture. So
Thank you, Peter. So Laura, and then we'll go on to number 2 and 3. You need to be unmute, Laura. Okay. If maybe she had stepped away, so in which case, let's see, I'll just ask her to unmute.
Okay,
There you go. There you go. There you go.
I think my things are somewhat late in line, but I really feel like when you talk about immorality, I think we have to define that, our society in war and our society in peace, because I think spies in war are intelligence gatherers at a specific level, and they have a defined set of rules and roles to live up to. Spies in everyday life have a different role. They are intelligence gatherers, but at a more personal level most of the time, or industrial way. And I think we have to define spies there and spies in war, just as we have to look at morality in everyday society versus immorality in war. When we decide to go to war, there's a reason for it. And I think we change our morality right then and there, because we are subjecting our people to death to some degree, and that's a big piece of morality that it has to be hard to get over, but we feel obligated to do so to save our country or to save the lives of millions of other people. So I think we have to keep those pieces apart and not, make definition about one set of people in immorality, calling people immoral in war, and would we call it immoral in everyday society, if that makes sense there. And I just, in so many ways, I think we just have to keep things defined in some way that we can deal with it better. And so I think we have to, get our systems sort of set up so that we understand what we're really looking at any moment in time. And, there's crossover in terms of what something may mean, but we have to really, again, be careful what it may mean in different places. Communication, okay, we communicate in everyday life, but, when we're communicating at war, we're communicating different kinds of things. And the level of communication takes on a much higher role, and it takes on a role that, makes, it depends on life and death, what we're communicating about, versus when we communicate, sort of, hi, how you doing kind of communication for those not at war and so forth. So that's how I feel about the whole nature of when we talk about the art of war and the pieces that we look at, that we have to define them within what we mean by war and take it from there.
Thank you, Laura. So Sarah, go ahead. We'll go on to number 3 and 4, or 2 and 3. Sarah?
You're on mute.
I'll give you another 10 seconds, Sarah, if that's okay. If not, maybe she had stepped away. So, okay, and Sarah, feel free to unmute and bring up your comments, but we're going to go ahead and continue. So, okay, you've taken your hand down. All right, so thank you. To the James.
Okay, this is the next section.
Read the 2 sections. Okay.
I'd read
Yeah,
2,
read.
okay. All right. Hence the use of spies, of whom there are 5 classes. 1, local spies. 2, inward spies. 3, converted spies. 4, doomed spies. 5, surviving spies. When these 5 kinds of spies are all at work, none can discover the secret system. This is called divine manipulation of the threads. It is the sovereign's most precious faculty. Having local spies means employing the services of the inhabitants of a district. Having inward spies makes use of officials of the enemy. Having converted spies, getting hold of the enemy's spies and using them for your own purposes. Having doomed spies, doing certain things openly for purposes of deception and allowing our own spies to know of them and report them to the enemy. Surviving spies, finally, are those who bring back news from the enemy's camp. Hence, it is that with none in the whole army are more intimate relations to be maintained than with spies. None should be more liberally rewarded. In no other business should greater secrecy be preserved. Spies cannot be usefully employed without a certain intuitive sagacity. They cannot be properly managed without benevolence and straightforwardness. Without subtle ingenuity of mind, one cannot make certain of the truth of their reports. Be subtle, and use your spies for every kind of business. If a secret piece of news is divulged by a spy before the time is right, he must be put to death together with the man to whom the secret was told. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mark, would you be interested or on? Mark,
I'm sorry, Joseph, I can't read right now.
Okay.
Let's just do one and go on to the translation.
I think that's good enough, actually, to be honest, because of where we are on the time. So.
Okay, yeah, this one. So again, Sun Tzu is very interesting to give all the numbers. So I have 5 different kinds of spy. Okay, so he said, hence, there are 5 ways of spying. Village spying, inside spying, reverse spying, dead spying, live spying. When all 5 ways of spying are used together, no one can know which way is at work. This is called the super principle. It is the most valuable treasure of a ruler. Village spying is to use the village man. inside spying is to use the officials of the enemy. Reverse spying is to use the spies of the enemy. That means double agent, double spying. Dead spying is to spread false information and that our spies transmitted to the enemy's spies. Live spying is to have the spies bring back the news. So Sun Tzu lists 5 different kinds of spy. Unlike other categories, it's not a category, but basically it's 5 ways, and you can use 5 all at the same time. And the next part I think is very important is, therefore, for the business of 3 armies, there are no more intimate relationship, nor closer than the one with your spies. There's no reward awarded more than to your spies. There are no secret shared more than with your spies. Remember, spies is so close with the leader. Okay, your spies cannot be used without sagely wisdom. The ways of spying cannot be implemented without morality of ren and righteousness. The fruit of spying cannot be obtained without subtlety of mind. Be subtle, be subtle. There is no campaign without using spy. If news is heard before the spies reported, put to death the spies and the reporters. I think here I'd like to have some explanation here. At the first part, talk about 5 different ways of spying. Personally, I will read this one more sales pitch or rhetorical. Okay, so but of course, some people would prefer to read it as technical. Okay, so that's just because I don't read this way. I think the important is this part. You see, Sun Tzu is talking about, first, he talking about spy is very close to the leader, okay? And you reward the spy a lot, okay? So think about, look like your brother, okay? You're very close to you. And then talk about, you need only the person with sagely wisdom, okay, with high moral sense, ren and righteousness. That's the highest moral. Only with high moral sense, high intelligence, and also be subtle. And I think he means the skillfulness is important. Okay, so talking about all the good things, the last part, Sun Tzu talk about the cruelty, right? If something wrong, something suspicious, kill them. Not only kill a spy who is as close as your brother and the person who knows this information. So you can see this kind of thinking here, okay, in a way is very close to your spy, and then reward a lot to your spy, and tell you the ruler, the general, have to only the person with very high intelligence, high moral standard, okay, with high skill, very skillful person can use spy well. But if something wrong, you kill them. Okay, I think that's the teaching here. I'm not saying I agree, but I say that's what Sun Tzu talking about this. Yeah, thank you. And Amang.
I have very little to add to the passage about 5 spies, but the scholar in me says, define your terms. And so we keep using the term spy. And I figured it would be worth making that explicit. I'm dropping it into the chat, but the word in question for spy that's being used is jian. And this word in colloquial Chinese is often used as the word between or as a go-between. It doesn't always connote a spy per se. And if you look at how the character's made up, it's made up of the symbols or the characters for gate and for sun. And so it's a sun underneath or enclosed by gates. It's a really interesting and poignant image to think that a spy is this harbinger, this passageway to shine light, to give you insight, to allow you to see in to something that's otherwise closed off to you. That's what this word keeps saying. And so when he's talking about the 5 types of jian, or 5 types of spies, he's talking about the 5 ways which somebody can do this. And they're valuable as long as they're able to keep doing this. But if you find out that your double agent might be a triple agent, or if you find out that they are, no matter how well you've treated them, no matter how well you rewarded them, if they could be a cost to you, put them to death immediately, because that cost could cost you more than the rewards you already rewarded them. And the whole point of having spies is to minimize your costs and maximize your benefits.
Thank you, Aman. So first up, we have Alexandra.
Yeah, Jason, I just wanted to say that this applies well to what I asked before in the previous discussion we had in your Chinese philosophy group on Saturday, my bad, about disinformation and having a fasting of mind, because I mentioned that sometimes when you have a fasting of mind and you receive disinformation, which is meant to poison you, what do? I would like to juxtapose these 2 sources, because here I see number 2, the use of the officials by the spies. So basically having the government of one country attack itself using spies and disinformation. That's exactly what I'm talking about when I say information that poisons the hearer. So I'd be curious to see if you can do a tie-in between those 2.
Thank you, Alexandra. And I don't have to go too far away from that, because just give some background, because this Saturday we read in Zhuangzi, which is Taoism philosophy, and Alexandra is talking about sending information, and they have a different kind of teaching about the Taoism. So, and I think that's an interesting comparison.
So thank you. Next up, we have Quan.
Yeah. I would like to come back to the etymology of the word jian with the sun between the representation of a door, if you want. So I would say it can be interpreted a little bit like what Aman said, meaning to bring light to the framework or to the dispositions of the enemy. Okay, the door being the symbol for the framework. The other thing that I want to say too is about what is a spy, because when we use the word spy, we often think to the fact that it's someone trying to get information from the enemy, which is true. But when we think about what in modern terms is called intelligence services or intelligence community, getting information from the enemy is certainly one of their duties, but it's not their main duty, because the main duty of the intelligence services is primarily to propagate disinformation, to provoke subversion, to provoke demoralization in the enemy camp, and to create a predictive programming. So most of the time it's not to get something from the enemy, but rather to put something into the mind of the enemy in order to make him weaker. And I stop here. And it corresponds more or less to category 4 and 5.
Thank you, Juan. So next up, we have James.
Yeah, I have to put on my sneaky hat here before I make any more comments. This is good. This is kind of heating up a little bit. I always think this number 5. I love it, number 5, because it makes me think about James Bond. You know, the guy with the exploding pens and the cars that drive underwater and all that stuff. They're the ones. That's actually, it's interesting here because it's live spying. In other words, it's not a type of person; it's actually an activity. So these are not necessarily individuals. These are the spies for 3 armies. So they could be a whole. It's like a whole network of spies, now, just like you have nowadays, and or a whole a system of spying. So I think that's one of the ideas that he's trying to drive home here, and that the whole effort involves a lot of subtlety, because it's not just the dead spying, the ones that the spies that basically expose themselves to the enemy's spies, and the live spying, but it's also the reverse spies, the idea of using the enemy's spies for your own purposes, as moles usually, and then there's the multi-level approach to spying, not just individuals on the ground, but also officials of the enemy's government, so or the enemy's army. So the idea here is that the subtlety of mind. Subtlety is what he wants to really emphasize 3 times, and there's that it's not something that's optional. I think it needs to be observed. I guess the other thing that occurs to me finally is that it's the idea of getting information. I think that was really great the way Iman put it. It is kind of like a shining through a gate. I don't think the door is wrong. I'm just saying this is the way. I just wanted to say this is the way an electronic engineer would talk about it. Information always comes through a gate. So it is a way of a gate is a means of passing information, and the sun, of course, is a shining. So the information comes shining through a gate, to speak in electronic engineering terminology. So pardon me for that nerdism, but that kind of really reflected strongly to me, is that the spy is a Jean. He is both a means, both the what is transmitted, the information, and the means of transmission. So it's really smart way to think about it.
Thank you, James. Followed by John.
Yeah, I just wanted to go to what Quan said, and I agree totally with what he was suggesting. I'd perhaps posit the term agents as opposed to spies in current vernacular, which also could take into account groups of agents or institutions, as James was suggesting. One of the things that I thought was interesting in the consideration of dead spies or misinformation is the term that we have now, post-truth politics. And without venturing into politics, I wonder whether in looking at the rise of fake news, whether in fact we're seeing played out in public acts of what Sun Tzu would call spying, where misinformation is being spread as a deliberate part. I wonder at what point the actual leader becomes a spy. Can the leader himself be a spy? Is this a new paradigm that we sit in, where we see leaders of great powers acting to spread misinformation as if they're actually acting in the course of a dead spy? Perhaps that's the limit of my political comment. And I just got a quote here from a paper I read, which is, in post-truth discourses, reference to the truth is of no importance to its power. Exposing it as lies equally does not diminish the power those words have. So the idea of what lies is, or what truth is, in fact, is almost not the purpose of misinformation. And it's almost like a paradigm shift in terms of some of the implications of this chapter. That's all I wanted to say there.
So thank you very much, John. Sarah, did you have a comment from before? That you had your hand up and okay, if not, we'll go into the final two passages, which is 4 and 5.
Okay. For the army to strike, the city to, oh God, I'm in the wrong one. I'm sorry, everyone.
Oh, that's the right one.
Yeah,
No.
I know, but I was reading your translation instead of the Giles. Pardon me. Whether the object be to crush an army, to storm a city, or to assassinate an individual, it is always necessary to begin by finding out the names of the attendants, the aides de camp, the doorkeepers, and the sentries of the general in command. Our spies must be commissioned to ascertain these. The enemy's spies who have come to spy on us must be sought out, tempted with bribes, led away, and comfortably housed. Thus, they will become converted spies and available for our service. It is through the information brought by the converted spy that we are able to acquire and employ local and inward spies. It is owing to his information, again, that we can cause the doomed spy to carry false tidings to the enemy. Lastly, it is by his information that the surviving spy can be used on appointed occasions. The end name of spying in all its 5 varieties is knowledge of the enemy. And this knowledge can only be derived in the first instance from the converted spy. Hence, it is essential that the converted spy be treated with the utmost liberality. Of old, the rise of the Yin dynasty was due to the Ache, who had served under the Shah. Likewise, the rise of the Chao dynasty was due to the Li Ya, who had served under the Yin. Pardon my pronunciations. Hence, it is only the enlightened ruler and the wise general who will use the highest intelligence of the army for purposes of spying, and thereby they achieve great results. Spies are a most important element in war because on them depends the army's ability to move.
Thank you, James. Mark, would you like to read your translation or not? Okay, so let's move on. We will go to your Jason.
Okay, great. Let's finish it. So, okay. For the army to strike, the city to attack, and the enemy to destroy, the names of the defending commander, lieutenants, visitors, gatekeepers, and advisors must be known beforehand by having our spy look for them. Okay, so go to very detail. It's a must to look for spies from the enemy who are spying on us, persuade them with profit, guide them, and release them. Therefore, the reverse spying can be used as expected. According to the information from the reverse spy, we know that village spies and the inside spy can be put into operation. From the same information, we know that spies can be manipulated to spread false information to the enemy. From the same information, we know that the life spying can be manipulated as expected. The prince must be aware of this 5 spying operation, and the awareness is based on reverse spying. Therefore, the reverse spies must be treated very well. So that, I think this part has a lot of detail on that, okay, the technical operation here. Finally, historically, I think he used, Sun Tzu used 2 examples, okay. This text, let's assume this text is written on 500 BC. So even it's very old, but during that time, China has very long history. So during that time, Sun Tzu is talking about the historical account 1,000 years before Sun Tzu's time, which is about 1500 BCE, right? That's the Yin dynasty, right? Yeah, that's right. And the second example, talking about 500 years later, or you want to say 500 years before Sun Tzu's time. That's he talking about the Zhou dynasty. So he used these 2 examples. Historically, okay, that means 1,000 years ago, the successful uprising of the Yin dynasty was due to Yi Zhi, who had served under the incumbent Xia court. 500 years later, the successful uprising Zhou dynasty was due to Lü Ya, who had served under the incumbent Yin court. Okay, so the history go from from Xia to Yin to Zhou, right? So each new dynasty, they rely on Yi Zhi or rely on Lü Ya, these 2 persons who is working for the enemy side. Okay, so here is a little bit strange. Nobody in today's mind will think Yi Zhi or Lü Ya are spy. So that means either Sun Tzu, okay, try to use this example to convince the prince, the ruler, to use spy, or Sun Tzu may have a different definition of spy, because he probably means use the people, the high-ranking officer on the enemy side, treat them well, then they some way or not they will work for you. I think that's the Sun Tzu means, and so the definition of spy could be very different than what we are thinking today. So hence, it is only the enlightened prince and the worthy general who can employ those high intelligence as spy and have great achievement. So he talk about the people who serve as spy. We are not talking about like only the person who looking for money. The best way is use high intelligent people for spy. He's talking about Yi Zhi and the Lü Ya, which are served as the high-ranking officer, and turn out that they do a lot of contribution, not only for the revolution or uprising, also after the dynasty being established, they also have a great contribution. So Sun Tzu is talking about the people serve as spy. You are looking for the smart people to do it. This here talking about the spying is the most element in warfare. 3 enemies action rely on it. So that's the end of the entire text. And then thank you everyone. We finish it. And Aman.
Yes, thank you. I will go into verbal diarrhea as quickly as possible to get out of the way. I thank you all. I enjoyed this process immensely. This was a fun text, although challenging at times to translate and to go in depth with. I could talk more about spying and I'd be happy to, but I'd like to give sort of an overarching, what have we taken from sort of this very rigorous examination of the Sun Tzu Bing Fa, because I've read it before. I've read it a couple of times, but this sort of long form, in-depth examination, and always when you do translation, you go even further into the text. Sun Tzu puts forward, and I've said some of these things before, so if I'm repeating myself, well, it's good advertising. Sun Tzu is putting forward an argument for a new standard. That is really what this art of war is about. It is arguing for a new standard of soldier, of general, of battle-ready people within the kingdom. In that very last passage, he mentions the Xia dynasty, he mentions the Yin dynasty. To give you some sort of presentism, he's talking about what was to them as far away as the Viking incursion into Northern Europe was for us here now. That's the span of history from his time to what he was referring to. And in all those centuries, warfare had been done away. It had been a thing, very ceremonial, very pomp and circumstance, very much the auspice of the nobility to go out and show their honor and show their might and show their worthiness and their charioteering skills on the battlefield. I believe it was David who asked about what was in the Analects. One thing is Confucius' wry sense of humor about maybe I'll learn to be a charioteer, because that was still considered a noble endeavor at that time. Sun Tzu is putting an argument for a standard of a general, of a military man who knows the value of collecting, controlling, and exploiting information, and that those are the greatest resources, the greatest assets any sort of military man can actually have. Because at best, and he says this early on, if you can win without fighting, that's a great day. Nobody spent thousands of gold a day. Nobody had to die, maybe one or two people, but they were very surgical, very strategic, very minimal. And you achieved your ends without having to incur huge cost. Chapters 1, 2, 3, plan. Make a impartial judgment about doing this. Don't do it because your honor's on the line. Don't do it because you feel a vendetta. Do it because it benefits you. That's the only reason to go to war. And war is really just a proxy for battle of wills, which is why this text continues to speak through generations to the present, because it's not just about being in the battlefield. It is about that. It is a manual for the battlefield, probably one of the first ever written. But more than that, it is a treatise on strategy and on dealing with conflicts of will. And it is, as I've said before, the burgeoning of a system of systems analysis of how complex this entire enterprise is. And that truly the most successful at it will wind up sort of taking the culmination of everything, not recipes or A, B, and C out of the text, but a culmination of the text and a compilation of it into some sort of successful execution in a field, in an endeavor that is multipolar. It's an interplay of so many different facets, and he just touches on them all. I could go on, I'm not going to. I thank everybody for being here. I may go off camera, but I'm still listening. And I'm excited to hear your thoughts. And thank you again. Thank you, Jason. It was fun.
Thank you, Amon.
Yeah.
Enjoy your summer.
So we will take 1 month off, and then really thank you, everyone. And then August, and we will do Confucius Analects. And then again, here we talk about a lot of moral, especially the word "ren," okay, benevolence or humanity. Okay, that's the key. okay, not the spy. Okay, so if you go to the Confucius, you focus more on the moral side, and then Confucius, I believe he's against war. Okay, because we are all people, why we fight each other. So different kind of thinking here, even they live in the same time. So again, I'm happy I will stay here for another 30 minutes, and I'm very appreciate everyone can give me feedback, and then thank you for everyone's support, and I hope to see you guys on the next part of translation on the Confucius and the text. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. So first up, we have James, and then I see Laura, you're raising your actual hand. We'll get to you as well. Go ahead, James.
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of like really a lot on Sun Tzu's side here, and I'm kind of, because this is a whole system and it's a whole idea of managing a network of different kinds of spies at once, and creating this whole balancing act and keeping all the balls in the air. And it's very, very impressive, the idea. And I'm just wondering how this filters down, because we've talked about war as a analogy for daily life in business, or life, in corporate life, or in even to a certain extent in personal. I'm wondering how it even filters down to personal relationships. I don't want to. I'm really sort of like trying to cause controversy. Is there a way this sort of idea of having spies in the enemy's camp, if you have an enemy, right? If you have someone that's dangerous to you, if there is let's say even a state actor, maybe there's a state actor that is opposed to your particular political ambition, things like that. You might want to have spies. You might want to have spies, village spies, and inside spies to sort of take care of them. And obviously you can't put people to death, right, for delivering bad news and stuff like that. There are limits when you're not a state actor. But the idea that some of these things can actually happen is really, really entertaining. That this could actually happen on a much smaller scale, and I'm sure there are people that actually do that. I'm sure there are people that read this book and use this spying chapter as a kind of a gateway to how am I going to start treating my important friends. And the most important friend in terms of spy here is the reverse spy. He says that in section 4. The reverse spy is how we know that the village spies and inside spies can be put into operation. So they are among us, and they can tell us information about how the enemy camp operates, and therefore how to put our own spies there into operation. And those are the dead, the dead spies, of course, are the ones that can be manipulated. In other words, you have something over them. Maybe you don't pay them a lot, but you're passing things along to the enemy. And but he does say that the reverse spies are kind of like the most important, because they're actually in the enemy's camp. And we have to sort of be we have to, I think we have to be careful about not paying them too much. They can't be the guy with the house on the hill or anything like that, or the other spies there, or the other agents he is among the other government agents he's among. We'll start to get suspicious. But he's just saying that we have to treat these sort of people best of all. And in a way, might, if you're judging, you would say, those are the most sleazy of all, right? Because they're reverse spies. So I kind of like the general flavor. it sounds amoral, but we have to understand that it's used. This is the Cold War. This was the Second World War. And in the Cold War, this was like the whole game. You know, it's like how many spies Soviet Union could have in the New York City, you know, how many spies the US could have in Moscow. And it was like all a big very, very big game that was actually going on. And I don't know if you know things, I've seen like documentaries that basically show whole floors of buildings being in New York City being devoted to spies. I mean, that's how many spies there actually are. Whole floors of business high rises devoted to one particular spying group. So and that was just the American side. That's not counting, you know, the whatever was going on in the gigantic Soviet embassy and so forth. So yeah, so it's almost like a big business in itself. But I think when we're looking at it from the standpoint of 100,000 men, 3 armies, yeah, exactly. You have to have it, and what do you gain by it? But nevertheless, now that this information is out there, how many people are actually using this in their general lifestyle and strategy as part of their general lifestyle and strategy? You know, in other words, how many live spies do I have? How many village spies can I count on? How many what do you call it, officials do I have in the corporation of my enemy, and so on and so forth. So this actually, there is a kind of like a reflection to a certain extent, although the only thing that says that silly idea to me is that, generally speaking, people are not that motivated to take this much care in their jobs, but there are people that are highly motivated. I'm just thinking about that kind of eventuality, that people who are highly motivated are going to be actually carrying out this kind of thinking in real life. That's all.
Yeah, great comments. Yeah, actually, I was thinking about when you said not overpaying a spy in the camp of your enemy. And
Yeah, he doesn't say
James
that,
actually,
but that occurs to me as a problem.
Yeah. But older James came up like the idea that where he was buying houses with cash, and it's like at some point, and they didn't pick up on it. Any case, Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Joseph. I want to thank Jason and everybody for this really, really great discussion over the course.
You got a little background. You got a little background noise there, Mark.
Can you hear me okay?
Now we can.
Okay. Really good discussion. I was in a Kinko's today, and just as I was walking out, I noticed, you remember those laminate things that they sell that are kind of like fold out, like learn how the heart works, learn how to, does anyone know what I'm talking about? They had one for Sun Tzu, and unfortunately, I couldn't, go back and buy it, but I'm going to buy it soon, and I'll report back on how it distills down the work, the Bingfa, I think you said it was called. My question is, I know that one of our earlier participants, I'm sorry I don't remember her name, made a suggestion about there possibly being 2 moralities, one for a state either at peace and one at war, or not at war and at war. But I'm just wondering,
That was me.
Go ahead.
No, that was me.
It was Laura. It was Laura.
Oh, thanks, Laura. I don't remember, but does it state anywhere that we are always in a state of war, Or is there really a distinction between a time of peace and a time of war? If we're not at war, then we're still preparing for war. And isn't that sort of a perpetual state?
Mm.
Of ever vigilance. Well, war is the greatest affair of the state, so that would make it always a priority. Yeah, I mean, that's how I see it. I think it would be, yeah, it's now depending on how much you your expenditures would be for war. You know, Sun Tzu does talk about the expenses of going to war. So therefore you're taking money from one to go to another. It's a guns or butter argument. So anyway, Jason, or I don't know if you have any.
Yeah, I remember probably Kwang talk about, right? If you read the war as a metaphor, right? So a war is the highest human activity. So you always can use war as a metaphor. But let's forget about metaphor. We talk about the real war. And the very beginning, the very first chapter, very first sentence, right? Sun Tzu said, warfare is a great affair to a state, right? It is the ground of life or death, a Tao or a path to survival or destruction. It is a subject that must be exact. So just like Mark talked about, you are prepared, you always prepare for a war. Just like everybody, you should always prepare something happen, right? You are not going to attack somebody, but you always have to prepare something. When you sleep, you have to lock the door. So you have just make sure your door is locked, not because you hate your neighbor, you worry your neighbor to break it, but that's something you need to prepare. That's how I read this one, and that's I try to respond that one. And then we always not forget on the very first sentence, Sun Tzu talking about the war, right? It's a great thing, life and the death. So,
Go on.
Well, I would like to interact with the question of Mark because I think it's very interesting. Are we always in a state of war? But first, I would like to give the easy answer. Okay, that book has been written by an aristocrat for aristocrats. So when you are born in high families of wealth and power, I would not say the goal of your life is to maintain your wealth and power, but it's a major goal of your life and to maintain your wealth and power. And if one of the major goals of your life is to maintain your wealth and power, you're necessarily in a constant state of warfare, okay? Even if there's no battles per se. And it goes very well with that last chapter because most of the warfare is not done on the battlefield, but rather in the mind, in our own mind first, and the mind of the enemies. And here, and it gave me a segue to go to the higher answer. Let's not forget that, I think that I repeat this for the 10 times maybe, that in this book of the art of war, you have 3 parts, okay? Chapter 1, 2, 3, who are the high principles part, 4, 5, 6, the epistemological overture, and 7 to 13, the operational skills. So are we always in a state of warfare according to that higher answer? Yes, because we are always in an epistemological growth in the sense that we are always in evolution of our mind from plutocratic or democratic motivations to democratic and aristocratic motivations. In that sense, and it would be the same answer that the Bhagavad Gita would give, because the battle in the Bhagavad Gita is not primarily the battle in the battlefield, but in the battle in the mind of Arjuna. So
Right.
same for the art of war of Sun Tzu. It's not for nothing that half of the book is devoted to the metaphysical, ontological, and epistemological dimensions. And the second half of the book is devoted to the more down-to-earth operational skills, but at the same time, even in that part of the operational skills, we are reminded quite often of the metaphysical and epistemological dimensions. And I just want to take 1 minute to finish, because that art of war from Sun Tzu is 25 centuries old. And I have to say that it influenced a lot Chinese civilization, okay? Because in the mind of the Chinese people, you never go to war in the sense of a battlefield before subduing the enemy psychologically first. And if you are not subduing the enemy psychologically first, the victory is far to be certain. But if you subdue the enemy psychologically first by predictive programming, by subversion, etc., you will increase by manifold your chance at a victory. And if you cannot subdue your enemy at a good enough level, try to buy him before going to war. And I would like to end with an example, which is the apex of stupidity for the Chinese. And when Japan went to war with the US in 1941, and the industrial capacity of Japan at the time was 10% of the industrial capacity of the US, it is an example of the apex of stupidity for the Chinese. And I stop here.
Thank you for that, Quan. David.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to sort of take up the question James both raised about the analogy in personal relations. And I think that it works both ways, because this is an insightful psychological book that talks not only about psychology, but also the ground and tactics, that aren't the human aspect, and it combines all that. So it's a systems approach. So it should, inform us. And I think part of this is this: we use these wisdoms, we from common sense. It's intuition, especially someone who's good at networking, relating to people. I think they're doing these things, maybe even explicitly, but without reading this text. And when they read this text, they go, yeah, well, of course. Because it applies as much to understanding people as it does to hostile spying. It's non-hostile spying is important in general relationships. You want to see what people are really like and how they operate and what their real intentions are. And you're discovering that all the time indirectly, right? So in peacetime or not, you're always, as much as you're relating to people, improving your bonds with people or improving your understanding of them. So how do you talk to someone who doesn't believe you? This suggests you need a spy on their side they listen to. What is a local spy? What is an official on their side? Someone who has credibility. So if you talk to someone who has credibility with the person you're trying to reach, and they speak on your behalf, or they, because they're told indirectly through your work about something you want to inform the other person of, you can use your channels. These are the channels of communication. So I think that's part of what this is, saying the trusted friends, and the ones just living in the area. Those are the villagers and the local officials. The officials not only have the ear of the power, the ruler, but they also can take actions within that camp. So you know exactly, what kind of people you're talking to, who's listened to by X, their closest friends, and who talks to them, someone you've converted to see your way. That gets your expression of your values or whatever you want to get across onto the other side, who actually knows the reason why X is doing this. because it appears one way and you don't know how to interpret it, at least not effectively, until you talk to one of their peers who's heard from them. So you need a spy to interpret somebody's behavior until you really are intimate with them in the first place, right? Or unless they're disclosing to you in a way that you're sure is truthful. And as far as doomed spies, if you're competing with someone, you can feed them misinformation and they'll go in and they'll look bad and doom themselves for not reporting honestly or not working for that other person's, so yeah, all these things play out in terms of information war pretty directly. Also in terms of just personal one-to-one relationships, in terms of community.
Thank you, David. This is something that I would really like to come back to, is one of the interpersonal relationships. And just how it applies to our lives in general today, or to modern society, and then what everybody has taken from the book in general. I would also like to get people's thoughts on that. So James.
Yeah, David, you gave me some more thoughts. I wanted to comment on the other question. I guess I'll do it in that order. The other question is, what does the state have to do if there's no obvious kind of present war, or is the state officially always at war? And of course, I don't think that's true. You could have centuries, without a war for a fairly large state. And the United States hasn't been continuously at war for extremely long time, just for decades, maybe you could look at it that way, no decade without war for a few decades. So that there is a state without war. There are ways of kind of ensuring no war, such as creating unions, which I would say the European Union is something like that. There's a general tendency to have no wars between the members of the European Union because they have strong trade agreements and control. They even control some legislation through it, I believe. So I don't think, so it's maybe a little bit intrusive that way, but on the other hand, it helps ensure the will towards maintaining a state of peace. And of course, you could have these with countries if they didn't consider themselves enemies. But I think when we look at the history, we look back at the past, there's including the 19th century and parts of the 20th century, but not, there were times of war, times of peace. And this was true in previous centuries, 17th, 18th, and 16th century, probably. The 16th, I guess the 15th century was pretty bad. Yeah, part of the 15th century. But what happens is a country that's in Europe, of course, what happens is a country needs to make calculations. A country has to there's parameters, right? So you have to parameterize what the danger on your borders are. In other words, what the danger on your borders is it going to, are other countries going to consider you weak and easy to invade and take advantage of on your border? And not all borders are equally strong in themselves. There are extremely strong borders in places in the world, and some countries have them. But other countries have weak spots and need to pay attention to those weak spots and station soldiers there. So there's this kind of preparation. There's always a degree of preparation that has to be made for war, and it has to be parameterized. You can't. These calculations must be made. What if they arrive by boat and we're not expecting it? So we have to consider. You have to consider what are the possibilities of them doing that, and part of the mitigation could be spying. In other words, peacetime spying could be part of the mitigation. In other words, we know what they're thinking because one of them is paid by us, something like that. But on the other hand, the parameters are probably a much sounder basis. In other words, we know their forces are that strong. We know our defenses are so strong, and we know that we could withstand an attack from country X. So those calculations will cause you to sort of like, well, we have a good basis for peace, to feel confident. Country feels self-confident. The people go about their business with confidence and don't actually need to prepare for all-out war. So this is a constant calculation. Good to have some spies, but you don't have to consider it war. It's just simply preparedness for unpleasant eventualities of miscalculating your own weaknesses, essentially, knowing when you have possible weak spots, such as borders or defenses and so forth, and not actually taking any mitigating measures at all. But mitigating measures does not mean war, in my opinion. Now, on what David was talking about, I think it's really good. The idea of just actually I forget what I was going to say, but what he said was very interesting. I'll stop there.
Thank you, James. Next up, we have Ocean.
Hi there. It's good to join. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, it's good to join right now. I missed the first few hours, but I totally agree with Sun Tzu's idea of using and dealing with the spies. And I've enjoyed a few people mentioning about the use of the spy in information warfare and so forth. I totally agree. At the same time, I want to add that great philosopher Thomas Hobbes said each human being is essentially at war with everybody else. I mean, it's a very cynical view, but at age 53, I would agree. I mean, some wise people said that in the free market, economy is a warfare without a weapon. Because we're constantly competing. If you're the CEO of the large corporation, your job is to steal as many customers as possible from your competitors and put them out of business. It's nothing. It's just a warfare. We are constantly at war in the free market in order to not be eaten alive by your competitors. And a lot of people, we have over 40 million Americans are currently on the food stamps, and millions of people are homeless. That shows that we are not in the utopia. We are in constant war. Not necessarily everybody who's joining this kind of meeting. So I'm sure most of us are successful and don't worry about survival, but it is a warfare. So it's very important to win and how to assess and win the information warfare. And that's all I have to say at this moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ocean. Jason, followed by Mon.
Yeah, by the way, I need to go in a few minutes, but yeah, just thank you again. I think that we, among Joe and we all work together I think for over almost 2 years. I think we start from translate 道德经, okay? Now is then they go to Confucius Analects and they go to the Art of War, and we probably will go back to Confucius to finish the second part of the book. So I think I learned a lot when I look at my translation at the 道德经 at the beginning. I say, oh, I should do much better than this. So that means we all improving. We learn a lot through this process. Even we read this many times. And before I never think Art of War is a great book, be honest, before. But gradually, I still don't call any book as a great book, okay? But I think it's really depend on what your attitude, right? If you put the effort on that, every book can become a great book. You can read the Bible, say, that's just another fake story. Or you read into, you find out that's a great book. So really depends on what's your attitude. At least that's what I learned. And then especially for the ancient book, they exist for over 1,000 years. They must have some reason they exist for some, maybe the wrong reason, or may not have the right lesson for you to learn. But even if it's the wrong lesson, you will know, that's the wrong lesson. I'm not going to learn, but at least you know it. I think that's important. So I will not say I totally agree on Sun Tzu, but but I learned a lot from this. Even something I disagree, still learn a lot. So I really enjoy everyone, and again, doing the translation, most benefit is myself because I read in a different way, and there's no way, and also among. so and we make a friend. I start to know a lot of people, even most of the people I never meet face to face, and then meet in person, but we really know a lot of people, know a lot of experience. I think that's a great experience. And then for Confucius intellect, it's difficult for me to convert my mind from Sun Tzu's thinking to Confucius' thinking, because when you go to, that's the way I work, because I have to put myself in the author's mind, then I can do the translation. So I remember I talked to Armand, it's so difficult for me to jump from Confucius intellect to go to Art of War, because that's a totally different mindset. But after probably 3 months, I'm fully involved in this one. Right now, I'm thinking about go back to Confucius. I look at the text a few times, but how am I going to start on this? So it becomes a little bit difficult. That's why I ask for 1 month's break, so I can basically empty my mind, transfigure my personality from Sun Tzu to the moral Confucius scholar, so I can learn this one. So, and anyway, that's just my experience, and I think that's great. And I hope to see you guys on the next section, and then we will see how much we can go. I think that's a great experience.
Jason, just 30 seconds, just for me, for my pleasure to contradict you last time on the Sun Tzu reading. I think that Sun Tzu and Confucius are the same because both were gentlemen. And in the case of Sun Tzu, he had to add some practical skill for warfare, but fundamentally, they were Junzi. Yeah,
but probably you and I are different people, So I read the. I keep asking myself, what do I learn from this? So to me, I probably don't see much difference by reading this one and reading Plato's dialogue. Okay, so
I agree. I totally agree with Quan. They're very similar.
Yes,
so very similar.
Yeah. Well, so basically, I would say that it's more difficult.
I totally agree.
It's more difficult to stay a gentleman in a warfare situation than in everyday situation. So you even need to be a deeper gentleman in warfare.
Well, I would say they were different. I would say they were different because one of them had a job and the other one was Confucius. And that goes to speak towards the difference between an idealist and a pragmatist. And Sun Tzu was a pragmatist of the highest order. Confucius was a great thinker, but he was an idealist through and through. I wanted to jump in and thank Jason. I find it funny because you say on one hand, you're trying to remove yourself and just convey the words, but then you have to reorient yourself because the words, they affect us. There's no way around it. When we're reading it, when we're engrossed in it, those words have a way of working their way into us and monkeying with the gears of our own internal feelings and thoughts. And the question you posed, Joe, about what is it people have taken away from this? I've taken away that warfare is a proxy. It is simply a MacGuffin that Sun Tzu used. And what he's really getting at is clash of will. When you pit your will against someone unconforming, someone who you cannot convince in any other way. And he stresses, convince them any other way first. There should be a better way to convince them. But if you're going to actually have to have your will and someone else's come to loggerheads, fight like they owe you money. That's really what it kind of boils down to. Don't pull your punches. Don't stand on ceremony or nobility or, you know, the rules of etiquette. If you've gone that far, you have to go in all 100% all the way. When I taught self-defense, I always taught my students, if you have to punch somebody, then you punch them until they can't hit you back. Not until they won't, until they can't. There is a difference, because you do not leave yourself open to thinking, okay, I'm good, and then give your back to somebody who's now motivated to do you more harm. That is on a very personal level, but blown up to the macro level, it applies at a countrywide level too. If you think of warfare as a proxy for a contest of wills, then the question, are we always in a state of warfare that Mark posed? No, not always. There are moments when you're not pitting your will against another, but that potential always exists because you and someone else's agenda don't always sync up. And so you must always be prepared for, okay, we're going to have a clash of wills. Can we resolve this without a need to go to blows? Because that's going to be best for everyone involved. If not, then have you done your due diligence? Have you done your homework? Have you done your push-ups? Have you spent your, 3 threes on the heavy bag to know that if this is going to come to blows, I'm walking away from this much less injured, much less scratched, much more benefited from it than you will. This will cost you more than it will cost me. And that's kind of his overall takeaway. As far as where does this apply into everyone's day-to-day life, James asked, I mentioned I got my job because I had insider information, because I had a spy inside the college who said, hey, this job you want, this is the dean you talk to, this is her credentials, and this is what you two have in common. You should lean on that and write her a letter. I am not above using my inside spy or my reverse spy to benefit myself. And hopefully I benefited, the organization at the same time. But I think we all use a lot of the, not just strategy, but even the tactics of the Sun Tzu in our day-to-day lives. It's just whether we do it eyes open or whether we do it with a sideways glance and pretending like it's not really, some sort of nefarious aspect of his darker strategies. So that's my 2 cents. I'm actually looking forward to getting back to the analytics, which is a sentence I never thought I'd actually say. It'll be fun to do this again, and I think Jason and I get better at it each time we do it. So thank you guys again.
That's a great experience, and for the translation and for present to everyone and get the feedback, from everyone, either agree or disagree. But I think to me it's a great experience. One last thing I'd like to say, just thank you. And then next time you see me, I'm not Sun Tzu, I'm Confucius. So see you guys, and thank you everyone.
Thank you, Jason.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Aman. It's
Mamanzo.
Take care.
Thanks, Jason.
So